Anxiety is about 30 to 40% heritable, which sounds scary, but it actually means the opposite of what most parents fear.
Okay, so let's dive right into this. That 30 to 40% number, it comes directly from these massive, landmark meta-analyses of twin and family studies. The absolute gold standard for understanding how traits are passed down in families. Now look, if you are an anxious parent with a cautious child, hearing that anxiety is heritable might instantly trigger this huge wave of guilt. You're probably thinking, oh no, I gave this to my kid. But I want you to hold on to this 30 to 40% figure, because we're going to look at why it should actually be a massive sigh of relief.
See, we often tell ourselves this story of a genetic life sentence. It feels like a padlock snapping shut on our child's future. But what the science actually says is entirely different. Genetics do not dictate a verdict. They really just set a starting point. Sure, they load the dice, but they absolutely do not determine the outcome of the roll.
Section 1. What heritability actually means. Let's unpack the science here for a second so we can just permanently de-escalate the panic around genetics and mental health.
So the absolutely crucial point here is understanding what the word heritable actually means in a scientific context. Heritability is a population-level estimate of genetic variance. Basically, it's a statistical way of explaining how much of the differences we see in a giant group of people can be pinned on their genes. What it is absolutely not is a personal life sentence for an individual child. If anxiety is 40% heritable, it doesn't mean your specific kid is 40% destined to develop a disorder, or that 40% of their personality is locked in some vault you can't touch. No way.
In fact, if we average that heritability out to roughly 35%, just look at the rest of this pie chart. The vast majority of the variance, like around 65%, is driven by environment, learning, and life experience. And honestly, that is the major takeaway from developmental reviews of anxiety genetics. The lion's share of your child's outcome is not written in their DNA. It's written in their experiences, their environment, and the skills they pick up along the way.
Section 2, the cautious infant temperament. Let's see how this builds, because we really need to talk about what exactly is being inherited in that 35%. Because spoiler alert, babies are not born with clinical diagnoses like generalized anxiety disorder or social phobia.
What actually gets inherited is usually a temperament. And in the world of anxiety research, one of the absolutely strongest known early risk factors is a specific behavioral phenotype called behavioral inhibition. Now, you might not know the clinical term, but if you have a cautious child, you know the behavior. This is the infant or toddler who reacts to novelty with extreme caution. They withdraw in new situations. They're the ones clinging to your leg at the chaotic birthday party, displaying early distress to pretty much anything unfamiliar. It's a highly heritable, biologically based profile.
Which brings us to the exact fearful question that is probably sitting in the back of your mind right now. If behavioral inhibition is such a strong risk factor for later anxiety, does having a shy, cautious infant guarantee an anxiety disorder later in life? Like, if they've got the wiring, is the outcome inevitable?
Section 3. Risk is not destiny. I want to emphatically transition right into the most important, liberating scientific truth of this entire explainer. Here it is. Most behaviorally inhibited children do not go on to develop an anxiety disorder. This is the crucial honesty beat of the scientific literature. Research shows that only about 40% of behaviorally inhibited kids actually go on to develop an anxiety disorder. Think about that. That means the clear, overwhelming majority, 60% of these cautious, fearful kids, do not. So yes, an inhibited temperament raises the risk, for sure, but it absolutely does not guarantee the disorder.
So how do we get from a super cautious temperament to a totally healthy outcome? Well, it happens through what researchers call gene by environment interplay, or G times Z. See, genetics and environment aren't two separate buckets. They interact constantly. Whether that early temperamental risk hardens into a clinical anxiety disorder depends entirely on this interaction. The environment your child is in literally interacts with their genetic wiring to shape their developmental pathway. It's like a giant puzzle.
Take a look at these developmental trajectories. This chart tracks anxiety severity from early childhood all the way through adulthood. You can have a group of kids who all start in the exact same place in early childhood, with that highly behaviorally inhibited, cautious temperament. But over time, their paths diverge wildly. Some follow a stable, high trajectory, while others diverge onto a low or moderate path. It is the exact same genetic starting line, but entirely different destinations.
So, how do they get on that better path? Well, the data shows us the mechanism. When a child's cautious bias stays strong and is combined with an environment that allows them to just constantly avoid their fears, well, their risk rises. But when children are supported by their environment to develop what researchers call flexible attentional control, which basically means learning to shift their attention, regulate their big emotions, and gradually face their fears, they do just fine. The risk diffuses.
We even have 30-year longitudinal data tracking these exact behaviorally inhibited infants all the way into adulthood. Published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, this research confirms that while this temperament definitely leaves a lasting personality signature, like, maybe they'll always naturally be a bit more introverted or observant, the links to actual anxiety disorders are completely probabilistic. These are durable behavioral tendencies, absolutely not fixed fates.
Section 4. Changing where they go. Let's move to our final section and focus entirely on what this means for you, the parent. Because honestly, this science isn't just theory. It's a real call to action.
If you take absolutely nothing else away from this explainer, let it be this. A child's wiring sets where they start, but the right experiences change where they go. You did not cause your child's starting line. You didn't give them an anxiety disorder. But because that 65% of the pie chart is environment and learning, you defiantly hold the key to changing their ultimate destination. By actively teaching exposure-based skills, you're literally shaping how their genes express themselves out in the real world.
This is the entire scientific premise of teaching bravery. By facing fears instead of avoiding them, you have the incredible power to help them rewrite their destination. Thank you so much for exploring this science with me. So, as you look at your cautious child tomorrow, ask yourself, if their genetic wiring only sets the start, what experiences will you create to set their destination?